Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Abiding Savior Lutheran Church. Great to have you with us. A little cold out for February here in Phoenix, isn't it? If you would, as always, pull out your communication cards. Just take a moment, fill it out sometime during the service, and place it into the offering plate as it comes by. Also, if you would, pull out your message notes for this morning and pull out a pen or a pencil as I'm going to have you highlight some things. If you brought your Bible, I invite you to turn to John chapter 10. We're in the middle of our sermon series for Lent that I've called Jesus Declare, I Am. And what we've been talking about is that in our culture in America today, most people don't have a problem with Jesus, right? A lot of people say, I really dig Jesus. Jesus is cool. I love Jesus. Jesus is great as long as we compare Jesus to others, right? Some people say, boy, Jesus is, he was a great prophet like Mohammed. Or Jesus is a great spiritual thinker like Gandhi. He was a great martyr. But the moment that we begin to talk about Jesus as God and the only way to heaven, that's when people begin to push back to us. Say, whoa, now you're talking about something that we're not happy with, right? And some people will say, well, Jesus never even said, hey, I'm God, but he actually did. And what we find is in the beginning with the 6th chapter in John, Jesus begins to talk about these I am statements where he equates himself with God. And you might remember last week I said there's a bell curve. The first 5 chapters of Jesus were the really popular times of Jesus because Jesus was doing a lot of fun things, remember? Chapter 2 changes ordinary water into fantastic wine. Who wouldn't want that, right? Remember we said that? He talks in chapter 4 to this woman at this well and says, you'll never be thirsty again. Okay, the water's not as good as the wine, but we'll take it, right? And then in chapter 5, he feeds like 20,000 people with some bread and some fish, and everyone loves a free lunch. Right? And everyone's really rah-rah, go Jesus. Let's get on the Jesus train until chapter 6. And Jesus begins to say, I am. And just like our world today, people begin to push back against him. And you might remember from last week, in case you weren't here, you don't remember, what is so unique about Jesus' 7 I am statements is that every time he says, I am, there's a string that connects Jesus to the Old Testament. The words for I am that Jesus says in the Greek, you might remember, are ego, eimi. Very good. Ego is the word we get the word self, meaning I. Eimi is the Greek word for exist, but it's an endless exist. It's not like I exist right now. I've always existed and I always exist. And the thing is remember, it goes back to Exodus chapter 3, when God tells Moses, go to Pharaoh, tell Pharaoh that, my people are slaves, and I want you to set them free. And Moses is like, that's a crazy suicide mission, Lord. At least give me your personal name so I can tell them who it is. And God says, I am who I am. The Hebrew word for that, Yahweh. Yahweh. And in fact, remember that we said that the people, they didn't even want to say the personal name of Jesus, so they would often skip it or come up with another word, Adonai. And even we can see this today in our own Bibles. If you're ever reading in the Old Testament, you see the word Lord in capital letters. That's not the word Lord, that's the word Yahweh. So it always connects Jesus. Every time he says, ego eimi, it connects back to the Old Testament, to God saying, I'm Yahweh. And the people get upset. Not only that, but today, we're going to talk about Jesus saying, I am the Good Shepherd. And this really strikes a nerve with the good Jewish people. Because all of the Jewish people in Jesus' day knew the Old Testament very well. And they knew a few things. They knew that in the Old Testament, God always related himself as a shepherd. It didn't put it in your notes, you can just listen. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 6. He says, "We are all like sheep, have gone astray, and each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." Psalm 23:1. We don't even need to look this one up, do we? Right? The Lord is what?
My shepherd.
The Lord is my shepherd. Ezekiel, you turn to Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 12, and it says, "As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so I will look after my sheep." So God is a shepherd to his sheep. You might not know this, but the word pastor actually comes from the word shepherd. Did you know that? The word pastor, the word shepherd in Latin is pastor. And a shepherd, for his sheep to be healthy and to grow, needs to take care of his sheep and feed them and nurture them, which is what a pastor does. So here's the thing. If God says, "I'm your shepherd," what does that make us? Sheep. Everyone turn to someone next to him and say, "Bob." That's who we are. We are sheep, right? We're sheep. I want to tell you something, okay? I had this, it was like a divine moment this week. I thought, man, I want my message to come alive. So I thought, Sandy, I have an idea, honey, for my sermon. You know, I've been doing some props and stuff, yeah. I said, I want to rent a sheep. She goes, "What?" I said, "No, really, I'm going to talk about a shepherd sheep. I'm going to bring a sheep in, and we'll talk about being a sheep." And Sandy's like, "That's just the stupidest idea I've ever heard." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "Well, first of all, where are you going to get a sheep?" I was like, "We're in Scottsdale. Someone's going to have a sheep around to rent somewhere." And she goes, "What are you going to do with it until Sunday?" It's like, duh, we're going to keep it in the backyard. She goes, we're not getting a sheep. I came in, I was telling Eleanor, remember that, Eleanor? I said, "I want a sheep." She goes, "No, that's not a good idea. With Sandy, that's not, I didn't get a sheep." Folks, one day we'll get a sheep in here. I have to clean up. I'm gonna have to settle for my shepherd's rod. Here's the thing. Sheep often get a bad rap as dumb animals. But one of the things about sheep, they know their shepherd's voice. They know their shepherd's voice, and they can recognize it. And that's why Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd." Our first job of being sheep is listening to the shepherd's voice. But let me tell you something about that. It's hard to do for us because there's a lot of cultural shepherds out there on the radio, on TV. And let me tell you, I'm going to be honest, I think we're addicted to noise. I really do. You know, I want to tell you, I've been so uplifted by people who have taken my invitation and going through our Lenten devotions that I wrote for our church. And one of the things I've been hearing is, boy, it's just taking those 10 minutes for pure silence has been difficult. Because what do? We get in the car and we turn on the radio. Right? We get at home, what do? Turn on the TV. And there's a lot of cultural shepherds out there screaming and yelling at us, trying to get us to do what they want to do. Right? And what we need to do is we need to learn to blot out their voices. Now notice what Jesus says. This is really interesting. He says this in John chapter 3. "The gatekeeper opens the gate for him. And the sheep, what? Recognizes his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name, and I want you to underline this, and he leads them. Here's the one thing about the shepherd and sheep. Sheep are animals that are very easily spooked. They get scared easily. They're not like cattle. You can't go and drive a sheep. Wouldn't this be great if I had a live sheep right here? Right? You can't drive a sheep, and it'll be like drama. What's going to happen? What's going to happen with the sheep, right? As Pastor Gary's driving the sheep. I know. I got to get off my little soapbox. But you can't drive a sheep. If you try to drive sheep, they'll go in every which way and direction. In fact, what a shepherd has to do is lead. Because sheep will follow the path and they will follow the shepherd. And what Jesus says, he says, I call them by name. You see, Jesus he's painting a picture of this perfect shepherd for us. He's not loud and boisterous and heavy-hitting. You have to do more, right? You gotta do better. You know, that's the cultural shepherds out on the radio trying to scare us. Jesus, the good shepherd, speaks softly. And he's painting a picture of a very close and intimate relationship between him and his sheep. I don't have to drive my sheep anywhere because I know them by name and they know my voice and they're going to lead me. I'm going to lead them. I'm going to go first. And they're going to follow me because they know I'm only going to lead them where they want to go. I'm only going to lead them to safe places. Just can I say a raise of hands? I did this Wednesday night. So last week I invited you to partake in this journey with me. It was Lenten devotional that I wrote. And it's a daily thing and it kind of goes along. Who here has actually tried to do it? Anyone here has actually tried it? Wow, okay, good. You might remember that one of the things we learned already, we've read is, in Psalm 22 it says, our ancestors trusted in you, and you delivered them. They trusted in you. Here is this whole point of trust. God's voice, Jesus' voice, it's not loud. Jesus' voice is soft. It's a soft whisper that calms the soul. It's a voice that's not loud, but that quiets our fears and stills our minds. It doesn't stir us up. In fact, one of the things we know about sheep is when they get scared, what they need most is to be held tight. And that's what Jesus is saying. It's the picture that he is painting for us of one who is close. He doesn't drive his sheep, he leads them. So my question to you this morning, before we go any farther, is what voice are you listening to? Are you listening to the voices of our culture that's loud? Or are you listening to the Good Shepherd? Because sheep do know their shepherd's voice. You might say, I don't believe it. Sheep are dumb animals here. How can you know this? Well, here's the thing. An experiment was done in Norway where a shepherd, a real live shepherd, had his sheep in the flock, his flock out in the fields. And he set up an experiment. He had 3 people at different times come and call his sheep, saying the same thing that he said, which happened to be tiki, tiki, tiki. And 3 times, the sheep ignored him. In fact, I've got a video, if we can watch it.
It doesn't have sound.
It does? Okay, that's fine.
We can make sound.
Yeah, we can. So here's the first one. So the sheep are out in the field. Here's the first experiment. This guy's going, he's saying, tiki, 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 tiki. Are the sheep even paying any attention? No. Nothing at all. Second one. She's actually trying to, if you can actually hear, she's actually calling like a dog. Like she's thinking that actually going to help. Are the sheep paying any attention? She gives up. The third one. She's actually pretty close. She's actually pretty as close to, you see, mimicking well, except for that part when they're like, totally ignoring her. Now here's the farmer. Notice their heads are popping up. And what are they doing? It's amazing, isn't it? Jesus said, after he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them and follows him because they know his voice. Our job is to tune out others and listen to the shepherd's voice. The shepherd's voice that calls us and quiets your biggest fears and calms your soul. Jesus says this in John chapter 10, verse 7. He says, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. And all who came before me, I want you to circle this, were thieves and robbers. But the true shepherd, the true sheep, do not listen. Listen. What Jesus is saying is this. There's 2 types of shepherds in the world. There's bad shepherds, and bad shepherds are only concerned with one thing, and that's their profit. And he said, when things happen, they're going to run away. The good shepherd, he doesn't care about profit. He cares about his people. Now, you might have thought to yourself at one point or another. You might have had a thought in your head. And you might have said to yourself at one point, wow, what an interesting thought. But is this thought from God, or is it from the thief or the robber, from the enemy? Or is it from me, right? Because let me tell you, as a follower of Jesus, you will always have 2 voices talking to you at all times. You'll have the voice of the good shepherd, and you're going to have the voice of the enemy. Always trying to get your attention. So how do you know which is which? When you get a thought, an idea, and you think, wow, is this from God or is this from the enemy, the devil, the thief and the robber? Who is this? How do you know? There's a few ways. Number 1, I'll tell you the first one. God's word will never, ever, ever contradict this book. So let's say you've been hurt by someone. Someone really hurt you deeply. And you're wounded. And you feel pain and anger. And there's a voice inside you that says, she hurt you. He really hurt you. You need to get revenge. You need to get even. You need To hurt her the same as she hurt you. Is that the Good Shepherd?
No.
Or is that the enemy? Yeah. Because the Good Shepherd's going to come down next to you and say, listen, I know she hurt you, but I want you to forgive them. I want you to love them. I want you to forgive, even though it's hard, just as the way I forgive you. Here's the second thing, and to tell you the second way you can tell. Years ago, there was a guy in my church, his name was Bruce. And Bruce, I don't know how to put this tactfully. Bruce was an addict. Meth, heroin, he was a full-blown addict. And he got clean and sober. And he was coming to church quite a bit for a while. And then he stopped coming. And what happens is when people stop coming to church for a while, I'll either send them a text or I'll give them a call. And I know some people are like, Pastor Gary's just trying to be the church cop. He wants to know why I'm not in church. Right? It's not really it at all. Usually, most of the time, I'm concerned. Sometimes I'm just calling to say hi. Sometimes I'm concerned because when people stop coming to church, a lot of times, it's just a symptom for something a lot deeper going on in their life. And that's what happened with Bruce. He hadn't been there for 3-4 weeks. So I called him up. I said, Bruce, how are things going? I haven't seen you in church. I missed you. Things are fine, Gary. Things are going good. I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, listen, can we get together and have coffee this week and kind of talk? No, I'm just too busy for that. I'm really busy. I'm hanging out with my friends this week. Everything's going good. I said, okay. It's like, I was just calling because I was concerned. I was worried about you. And there's this long pause. And he said, Pastor. I said, yeah. He's like, I fell off the wagon. I've been using it again, and I can't bring myself to come back to church. I said, why? That's when you should. He said, I hear voices in my head that say, Bruce, you're an addict. You're garbage. You should be ashamed of yourself. You don't make a mistake, you are a mistake. You're nothing. I said, you know what, Bruce, that's not the voice of God. That's the voice of an enemy. Every time the enemy talks to you, he always comes filled with shame and fear. If you ever hear you're garbage, you're an addict, you're a failure, you're a mess up, you shouldn't even go, God doesn't love you, you're in this all by yourself, and you know what, if anyone ever found out what you're really like, they would be disgusted. That's not the enemy. That's the enemy. That's the thief who comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. If you hear nothing else, I want you to hear this morning, okay? You're like the little sheep, their little ears go up. If you hear nothing else, I want you to hear this. The voice of the enemy, he knows your name, but he calls you by your sin. The voice of the enemy, he knows your name, but he calls you by your sin. You're an addict. You're a failure. You're a cheat. You're a gossip monger. You're a liar. The enemy knows your name, but he calls you by your sin. The voice of the Good Shepherd, he knows your sin very well, but he calls you by name. And he says, I don't label my kids. I call them by their name. That's my daughter, Doris. That's my son Jim. That's my daughter Kathy. That's my son Mike. That's my daughter Eleanor. That's my son Terry. That's my daughter Nell. He calls you by name. Because guess what? Your sin is not the truest thing about you. In Jesus, there is no shame and there's no contradiction. You know why? Because Jesus took all your shame and your cruddy stuff and he nailed it on the cross for you. So that there is no shame, no condemnation, no guilt. And he says, I want you to come to me. Because I'm not going to hit you over the head. I'm going to call you home. And I'm waiting for you with open arms because I love you. We can trust Jesus because he's the good shepherd. This is what he says in John chapter 10. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for his sheep. A hired hand will run when he sees the wolf coming. He will abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him and isn't their shepherd. And so the wolf attacks them and scatters the flock. The hired hand runs away because he's working only for the money and doesn't really care about the sheep. Again, he cares about the profit. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and they know me. No one can take my life from me. I invite you at some point to actually go through and read chapter 10 at home by yourselves. 4 times, Jesus says, I lay down my life. I sacrifice it voluntarily. For I have the authority to lay it down when I want, and also to take it up again. And this is what my Father has commanded. We never run away from our shepherd's voice, especially when we mess up, especially when we fall into sin. That's when we run straight to God because he's calling you by name. And there's one last thing. This is going to blow your mind. This is going to blow your mind. John 10:9 says, yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. Jesus is not only am I the good shepherd, I'm also the gate. Do you want to hear an interesting tidbit of information? In case you're ever playing Trivia Pursuit. In the days of Jesus, there were 2 types of sheep pens. The first was the sheep pen that was in town. That's where the sheep were sold and bought. And that one had a gate, a wooden gate that you would close. But you also had sheep pens out in the fields. Remember they were keeping their flocks by fields at night? Right? By flocks at night? There they couldn't have gates because of the elements. They would destroy the wood. So there what they would do, their sheep pens were built by huge rocks in a semicircle with an opening without a gate. In fact, I found a picture of one. There you see it. And it's not just that the gate blew off, it just never existed. And so what would happen is the shepherd would lead his sheep around from place to drink to places to eat, and he would take care of them. When they would get scared, he would hold them tight. And he would call them by name, and he would calm their spirits. He would calm their life. He would gently stroke them and gently talk to them and speak to them. And by the end of the day, after a long day, he would lead them right to the opening of that pen. And speaking gently to them to soothe them, he would lead each one into the pen. And he would count because he didn't want to lose not a single sheep. He wanted to make sure he ended up with the same amount of sheep as he started with. And then, when every sheep was safely in the pen, what he would do is he'd have a tarp like this that probably was wrapped around his waist during the day. Maybe he'd be carrying it. He would wrap it around his shoulders. And he would take his staff and he would lay down in that opening. And the shepherd would become the gate. And when Jesus said this, every good Jew who heard him talking and said, I am the gate, they would picture the shepherd laying that open. And Jesus is painting a picture for you. That he's saying, I'm there in front of the gate. And I'm saying, you want one of my sheep? You got to get through me to get to him. You want to steal one of my sheep over my dead body? You ain't getting any of my sheep. Enemy, you know what? You can come right up to this point, but this is where you stop. Because my sheep are inside. And they're safe. Jesus is the gate of salvation. He calls you by name. He's not loud. He's not obnoxious. He's not a task driver. He's soft and gentle. And he calls you by name, even though he knows your sin. At the very end, he always says, you're my child, who I love. And with me, there's no condemnation. There's no guilt and there's no shame. Every day starts brand new, with a new beginning, walking with the true good shepherd. Amen.